Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. I'm the Director of Communications for PFLAG National, and it is great to have you with us today. We have a really exciting and special episode today, so let me quickly bring in our host and my colleague and good friend, Jean Marie Nevada.
Hello, Liz Owen.
Hello, Jean Marie Nevada.
So, I have a question for you, Liz. What is significant about the year 1974?
It's the year after PFLAG was born. I know that. I don't know.
So there are two things. The first one was the year that I was born, and I really just did say that on a live broadcast. I know, unbelievable. But equally unbelievable was the year that the Equality Act was first introduced in Congress by New York Representative Bella Abzug. So we have been talking about the Equality Act in some form for as long as I have been around, which is a very long time. And those two things actually are unbelievable, but it's been 47 years and we still do not have equal protection under the law, do we?
No wonder Jean Manford took to the streets in 1973.
Exactly. Well, the good news is that something is finally really happening about it, and today is a very exciting day for that. So we are talking Equality Act. So Liz, I will see you a little bit later, and we are going to get started for the week. So welcome everybody to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Jean Marie Nevada. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National. My pronouns are she, or if you speak Spanish, ella. Every single week we get together to talk about some current affairs issue with some friends. And this week we are talking the Equality Act. So quickly, before I tell you who is joining us, and it's very exciting, if you would like to follow along with us, you can go to straightforequality.org/discussion series and access this week's article, which was written by Jo Yurcaba from NBC News. And it was about the House voting on the Equality Act this week. And so to talk about that, I would like to introduce our incredibly special guest, Congressman Chris Pappas.
It's really great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you for joining us on a day that is so busy. You just got back from the vote, didn't you?
I did, and it just passed. So it's a tremendously exciting day. Look, any day that you can not only pass a good policy, but affirm the dignity of human beings all across our country, it's a really positive day. So we're optimistic about what this means as the Equality Act moves on to the Senate.
So, Congressman, just for people who may be meeting you for the first time, I want everybody to know that the Congressman is from New Hampshire, representing the Granite State. You're the co-chair of the LGBTQ plus Equality Caucus and one of the original co-sponsors of the legislation, and notably, the first openly gay representative to Congress from the Granite State itself. And I have to tell you, in your bio, the thing I enjoyed most was that after graduating from Harvard, you went home to work on in your family's business, which just is awesome to say. So let's start by talking Equality Act. So for people who might be a little bit newer to it, can you just tell, sort of in a nutshell, what the Equality Act is going to do?
Well, it's pretty simple. It looks to add LGBTQ to our nation's civil rights statutes to protect our community from discrimination. And just as individuals based on race, religion, and other classes can't be discriminated against in housing, in employment, and public accommodations in this country, we want to make sure that the LGBTQ community has the same protection. So it's not asking for anything more or anything less than other communities enjoy under the law. And this is a step that a number of states have taken, but still in a majority of states, 29 states, the LGBTQ community lacks these critical protections. And so, if we are truly going to get closer to the promise of the founding of this nation and treat everyone fairly and equally before the law, this step is needed, and it's something that's supported by a majority of voters in each and every state. It's really an idea whose time has come. So I'm glad to see the House vote today, and I hope it will be followed up soon with the Senate approving it. As I said before, I think it is a good policy, but it also sends the message that everyone is welcome, that everyone is included and respected before the law. And that's a powerful statement.
It really is. And I think it's a statement that a lot of people don't even realize is actually necessary to say, because there are all of these gaps in legal protections. You mentioned 29 states. So can I ask you a question? Because I think one of the things that sometimes confuses people, first of all, is not knowing that this actually is a problem. Because I think to a lot of people, when we talk about these things, there actually is a look of shock. I've had people argue this with me because it seems so unreal that this could really be happening. But could you talk a little bit about specific to the workplace? Because during the summer of last year, the Supreme Court decision came back on Title VII, which offered some protections or some coverage for LGBTQ people in the workplace. How would the Equality Act go even further than that? And in what ways would that solve additional issues?
Well, it's making sure that LGBTQ people are equal in all aspects of our lives. The Bostock decision that dealt with employment was a significant step forward, and that was a 6-3 decision last year. We want to make sure that we reflect that in our statutes, as well as in administrative actions. And the Biden administration has taken some positive steps to make sure federal workers are protected on the job. But this goes beyond employment because we're talking about other gaps that exist in the law for LGBTQ people, whether it's credit, whether it's housing, public services and accommodations, the other facets of the civil rights laws that we need to make sure also include LGBTQ people. And, you know, the arguments we heard today were pretty typical. Lots of hateful rhetoric, lots of ideas that just aren't founded in reality. And I think the fact that we did have a Supreme Court decision recently on employment non-discrimination, the sky didn't fall. You know, our society wasn't upended. And in fact, this was a very positive development to make sure people in all 50 states can't just be fired for who they are. And I can't think of a more American statement than that, right? So the Equality Act reflects both sort of the sentiment that exists in our country, the principles of our founding documents, and some recent court cases. But you're absolutely right in your opening statement about not knowing that these gaps existed, or potentially, you know, some folks thinking that this is already the law of the land. That's not the case. We've certainly seen some important court cases and important steps forward in certain states, but we need to be fully equal in all aspects of our lives, and that's why this is needed. Thank
you. And could you tell us a little bit, because the Equality Act, obviously, we're primarily talking about the impact or the effect it would have on people who are LGBTQ. I think one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that this actually has benefits and protections for people who are not necessarily members of the LGBTQ community. Could you explain that a little bit for people? Well, absolutely. I think we are all better off when everyone is empowered and able to be themselves. I know in my own state of New Hampshire, we took early steps to approve marriage equality, to have non-discrimination under the law. And that was a significant recruiting tool for companies in our state to attract workers, to want to live in a very open and safe environment. And so I think when you allow people to be protected by the law, you unleash the full potential of these individuals and our entire country, and it really lifts everyone up. So there are benefits to our entire country by taking this step forward. And one of the things that I think is very clear, you know, by extending equality to others, it doesn't diminish the rights that anyone else has. And in fact, it enhances those rights, responsibilities, and liberties that we all enjoy. And it does take us closer to that promise in the Declaration of Independence that we are all created equal. Thomas Jefferson called that a self-evident truth. Of course, for centuries, there have been groups that have been left out. And slowly over time, we have gotten closer to that ideal. This bill takes us one giant leap closer. Yeah, and I think it really does come back to that point that this seems to be such an obvious basic principle, such an obvious move. It seems outrageous that it's taken this long. So we still have some more work to do on the Equality Act. We now have the House vote, but it does need to move over to the Senate. So this is what I have to ask you, because, you know, PFLAG, you've got parents, you've got allies, you've got people who are members of our own community. What can people who are in these groups be doing right now to help with what is happening with the Equality Act? Because we've been at work at this for a very long time, and it would be great if we could get it done this time. So what could people be doing right now? The most important thing is to reach out to your senators. Everyone has 2 members of the U.S. Senate representing their state. They need to hear from you. Even if you think the senators from your state might be automatic allies, it's important that they know that people are watching this vote, that they're concerned about full equality in this country. And sharing personal stories is the most powerful thing we have. That has what
has allowed us to take these giant leaps forward when it comes to full equality in this country. Telling your story changes hearts, minds, and laws. And we heard a lot of them today, especially from parents of LGBTQ individuals, parents who were so proud of their kids and so supportive. And I think that kind of family is just something we need to share because we need to make sure that people know that we are out there, that love is love. And so convincing a number of senators to come along and support this is the next crucial step. We can't get there without the support we need in the Senate.
So I'm going to ask you a question, which I think I kind of know the answer to, but I think it's really important for people to hear this from elected representatives, which is, I think a lot of people think when I call or if I send an email, it doesn't actually have any impact. Tell me, what helps you make decisions? Does it have an impact when people are sending those emails and those phone calls? And is there anything that particularly persuades you on things?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I get reports on a weekly basis of the volume and content of the messages that we're receiving into our office. I read a lot of the emails and sometimes even pick up the phone in the office and talk to constituents individually. That's the best part of the job. And so it's helpful to either reinforce what I might already think and believe or to convince me of a different opinion. And I think there are a lot of senators that haven't had to weigh in on this issue yet. We passed this in the House 2 years ago. It was never taken up in the Senate. And I think we have to make sure that they understand that there is broad support for this, that this is not a partisan issue. This is a family issue. It's an issue of individual rights and dignity. And telling those stories is important. And that does break through. It breaks through the clutter, especially when you hear something from someone that's really personal. That's the best thing we have to change the law ultimately.
You know, a PFLAG, telling our stories is sort of one of the core activities of any good PFLAG, or it's one of the first things that you learn how to do. So we talk about this all the time. What about for people who might be living in a place where they know that their elected representatives are not at all in favor? What would you say to them? Is it still worth making those phone calls? Is there anything in particular that you think that they might be able to bring forward that might be persuasive? Because I think a lot of people sort of look at where they might be living and think, there's just no sense in even trying here. This person's made their decision. Is there anything you would put out for individuals living in areas like that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think it is important still to voice your opinion, to talk about your family story. People need to know that we are everywhere. And a lot of what I heard from people who are opposing the Equality Act today, I think was based in the fact that they don't really know members of our community, or at least they don't think they do. There are people around them certainly who are LGBTQ, but they don't necessarily see them or understand their plight. And so I think we got to give people the benefit of the doubt. And they might not have been with us yesterday. That doesn't mean they can't be with us tomorrow. We've seen such a dramatic sweep to history over the last few years. And clearly, we're going to need to make new allies to make this change happen. And so let's not count anyone out. And at the very least, they hear from us. They know we're there. And they also know we're constituents and voters, too, which is important.
I used to travel a lot, and I would often talk to people in some places, and they would say, I've never met anyone who's LGBTQ. And I think there are people all around you, but sometimes until we start hearing those stories, it's sort of hard to envision. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about, as an elected official, this is the first major LGBTQ bill that you have worked on in your career. How do you think it's going to directly affect your community and your constituents? I mean, what have you been hearing from people about it? I think it would be interesting to get that perspective too.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the marquee piece of equality legislation, and that's why it came up so early in the term. We had a majority of the House that had signed on as a co-sponsor of the bill. So we knew it was ready to go, and this gives us maximum time to communicate with the Senate and to try to push them in the right direction. And of course, President Biden has pledged to sign the bill into law if it gets to his desk. But there are a number of other things we have to do when it comes to achieving full equality in this country. There are some damaging things that happened in the last administration that we have to work to undo. Some of that is already underway by President Biden. Some of that we need to follow up with legislation. One of the things I'm working on is making sure that folks who have served in the military, have worn the uniform of this country, have access to the full range of benefits through VA for their service, regardless of the kind of discharge they might have had in the past for being trans or being LGBTQ. That's something that folks in my district are really interested in, especially those who have served or have family members who have served. So I think there's a great deal of focus and excitement on this. Everything doesn't have to be political in Washington. And I think issues around human dignity and equality are things that can help unite this country and bring us closer together. It doesn't mean that we'll always have, 3/4 of Congress voting in favor of something. But as I said before, I think these bills are affirming. They help deal with groups that have been left out or left behind in the past, and allows our nation to move forward together.
And I think that's exciting. I think the thought of moving forward together on anything feels really, really good right about now. So I know we have a couple of questions, but I have one more question, which is,
Okay.
so what happens next with the Equality Act? What should people be watching for? What should they be paying attention to? Because this is pretty exciting stuff.
Well, it will head over to the Senate. It looks like there's another motion happening on it right now, so maybe we're not quite done yet. But it looks like once the bill goes to the Senate, there will be a hearing, likely in the Judiciary Committee and perhaps other committees of jurisdiction in the Senate. That will give an opportunity for folks to get on the record and share testimony in favor of the Equality Act, and for legislators to ask questions one way or the other. So I think we're looking at a process that gives us some time to gear up and for people to contact their senators and register their support. But really, we're hoping to get this done as quickly as possible. I mean, justice delayed is justice denied, right? And
It is.
the time has come for this. And, I hope if the senators are listening to their constituents, it will be an easy call. But we're certainly not taking anything for granted. And I think we'll have to work to build the kind of support we need. Clearly, there is support not just among a majority of Americans for this. As I mentioned before, the business community has also weighed in on behalf of this. We have hundreds of major corporations in the United States that understand that the time has come for the Equality Act. So they'll be an important ally in moving this forward.
It's really exciting, but I think it is a reminder to all of us that we shouldn't assume anything, and we're going to have to remain really diligent and focused on this until the job is done, because there's so much on the line. I'm actually going to ask if Liz can come back in, because she was mentioning that we have a couple of questions from people watching today, and if she's able to ask those.
Yes, we do. We actually have a number of questions. So we already tackled one that was about the timeline. So hopefully we got that question answered about what's next. This is a really interesting question because this is now headed to the Senate with an understanding, of course, that people who live in DC do not have representation in the Senate. Any suggestions how folks who are in DC can get engaged and help lend their voices to passage in the Senate?
Well, that's a great question. And there are those of us who strongly believe that DC should be a state, and that will be a separate issue that we'll be taking up. That bill passed the House last year. We certainly hope to pass it again. I think the evidence around COVID, around the insurrection at the Capitol, make it clear why DC residents deserve statehood. But absolutely, I think that you should look to connect with some of the groups that are organizing behind this, whether it's PFLAG, whether it is HRC or some others that are out there. They might have some creative ways of, speaking out on this, writing letters to the editor, or engaging in some of the grassroots activities around support for the Equality Act that ultimately can help bring some visibility to the fight and maybe change some minds in the Senate.
Now we're PFLAG National and our Metro DC chapter both endorse DC statehood, so that's something that we're definitely watching.
Absolutely. So we have another question here. I'm sorry, there's so many questions and comments coming up. I'm trying to keep track of all of them. So we have a question here from Toby asking specifically, what will the Equality Act do for Black, Latino, Indigenous, and people of color in particular?
Well, it's an important bill for Americans of all backgrounds, but we know about the intersectionality in terms of the discrimination that Black and Latino LGBTQ individuals face. We've heard the alarming statistics over the last several years, especially when it comes to trans individuals of color in this country and the type of discrimination and violence that they face on a regular basis. Those are alarming, and we have separate efforts underway that seek to make sure that we are collecting appropriate statistics, that we're focusing on this problem, that we are making sure our Justice Department is ready to address the increase in hate crimes that we have seen. But clearly, this would provide the legal protections for all LGBTQ Americans based on both race and gender and sexual orientation. And I think that is a critical step forward, but it needs to be supported with other efforts. Having full equality under the law is one thing, but making sure that people are safe in their communities, that they have access to services, that they have access to healthcare is a whole nother conversation. And we know that many marginalized groups are not on equal footing. So we certainly need that in terms of our legal code, but we also need that in practice in our country. And so our work for underserved communities, for individuals of color is going to be so important moving forward beyond this.
Thank you for that. So here we have a question from Jamie saying that research often shows that huge majorities of people support the Equality Act, and yet today we learned that since the year of Jean Marie's birth, the Equality Act has been introduced repeatedly. So why do you think it has not yet become law?
Well, I don't know, and that was news to me. I didn't know about the origins and how early that bill had been filed, and that's just tremendous. It reminds me of another fight that has been going on for about that long, and that's to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. And believe it or not, we're going to be taking a vote on that coming up, I think, in just a couple of weeks, to make sure that we're allowing other states to ratify the amendment, because we know some states recently, including Virginia, have done so. So that would be a huge development. But look, I don't know. I can't fully explain, why the resistance is so stubborn in places. But I just know that when I talk to younger generations in particular, they don't see what the big deal is. And as we were talking about before, many already assume that these protections might already be there under the law. And so I do think that, some education about the need for this, spotlighting this issue and trying to mobilize folks behind it, might help our efforts at getting this over the finish line ultimately. As I said, a number of states have taken this important step forward. There are others that are resistant, and this shouldn't just be an issue that's left up to the states. Even if you're protected by your state, you might be traveling somewhere or transferred to a different job somewhere else. And why should that make a difference? So I think in some states that haven't adopted civil rights protections for LGBTQ individuals, these are the places that might need it the most. And so the federal action is absolutely essential. The progress that we've made is certainly uneven. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. But we know, I think, based on what younger generations are telling us, the direction that we're heading in. And we just can't wait another 20 or 30 years till all the younger people are fully in power. We have to achieve that result today so they can live lives where they can live their truth and be who they want to be.
Liz, I was wondering if I can jump in because I see one more question that I don't know if you caught. And Congressman, it was what will the impact of the expansion of the definition of public accommodations in civil rights law be? Because I know that that's been one of the conversations that's been going on, and I don't think everybody completely understands that one. Can you talk about that just a little?
Yeah, and maybe I'm not fully understanding where the question's coming from, but this just takes the existing statutes and adds the LGBTQ community to it. So any protections that are currently in place in terms of public accommodations the LGBTQ community will have the same access to those. I know there have been concerns voiced around religious freedom and whether this means, a church will have to perform a ceremony for a same-sex couple or something like that. Religious institutions are not considered public accommodations under this law. So that protection is still there. And that's one argument that we'll have to continue to knock back, I think, as we move forward. But this is just nothing more or nothing less than any other American enjoys. And in all aspects of our lives, we deserve equal treatment.
We got that question actually from someone earlier today when we were talking about will a minister be thrown in jail for not performing a wedding ceremony? And we explained, that's a religious institution that, clergy have the opportunity to decide what ceremonies they will and will not perform, and that the two are not connected. And the person was genuinely asking the question. It was interesting. Like, they weren't there to challenge. They were genuinely asking, and we responded and they said, "Thank you, I wasn't sure." And I think sometimes it's hard not to answer questions defensively because we've been fighting for this for so long. And I think I'm so glad that you talked about sharing personal stories, because PFLAG's role to play is meeting people where they are and answering these questions as much as we can without defense, because we have an opportunity to move people forward who are really asking questions that they don't necessarily have answers to.
That's right. There are many religious organizations and denominations that are very supportive and embracing of the LGBTQ community. There are others that aren't, and the law respects that. Nothing would change on that front with the Equality Act being passed. And we still have a First Amendment to our Constitution, which respects the ability of people to practice the faith they want to practice, and draws a wall of separation between church and state. And ultimately, this is about our values as Americans. This is not about any one faith. And as a country, we are founded and grounded in these principles of equal protection of the law, of everyone being treated equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we all deserve access to that.
Congressman, can I ask you one more question about a piece of the Equality Act, which actually has to do with jury service? It was something that I very recently started to understand and was kind of shocked. For all the stuff that I do know about, our legislation, this one surprised me. Could you explain to people what in the Equality Act, how it would change what jury service looks like for people who are LGBTQ identified?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point, and that's one of the sections of the law that is rolled into the Equality Act to make sure that individuals don't face discrimination when it comes to serving on juries. That was something that I didn't have a full appreciation for before I started studying the bill a couple of years ago. So there are so many dynamics to both our legal code and the way we live, the way we go about our daily lives in our communities, the rights and responsibilities that we all have. And it's just about creating that level playing field and that even footing for each and every person.
About ensuring that you actually can be tried by a jury of your peers for real.
That's right. That's right.
Which I think a lot of people don't realize actually is not something that all of us actually can have. Liz, I think we might have one more question.
We do, and I think it's a really good one, and it goes to the heart of, I think, a lot of what's going on right now, about fear of losing power that drives a lot of argument. What will I lose when someone else gains more equality? And how do you address that fear with constituents? I think it's such a great question.
Yeah. Well, it's not a zero-sum proposition. There isn't a finite amount of equality out there where if I use it up, you don't get it. And I do think, as I referenced before, that my being equal enhances other individuals' rights and their free exercise of them. So I think it does come down to awareness and visibility and having contact with individuals who might have an experience that's different from your own. I think it's a lot easier to gin up fear of something you don't know than to do it for a family friend or someone who might be an acquaintance of yours. And that's why the process of coming out has been so powerful for our community. It's really been the driving force behind the progress we've seen in terms of legal rights, because it builds on each other. We all stand on the shoulders of those who have come before us, and by being out, we have visibility, and it becomes a lot harder to turn people against us when we are your friends, your family members, your neighbors, and we're just like you in just about every other way.
Thank you so much. I actually don't think there was possibly a better way to say it better why this legislation is so important and why being out and talking about our lives and talking about our stories and sharing our stories is so critical. Congressman Pappas, thank you so much for joining us. PFLAG is very grateful for everything that you've done and for spending such an important day with us. So thank you for being here.
Well, I want to thank you for all the work that you do. It's a tremendous organization, and your contributions and the impact that you have had over decades is really immeasurable. So thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Liz, once again.
Thank you. You have me in tears, Representative. I really appreciate everything. Thank you.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks.
Thank you. And that gets us to the end of another show. And boy, was that an exciting one. A little emotional, I have to admit it. So we end every show the same way by reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and to be kind. And most of all, wear your mask. Next week, make sure you join us. We're going to have another fantastic show. It is Bi Plus Health Month, and we are going to be talking about bi identity, so you definitely don't want to miss the show. Once again, if you need any support, please visit us at pflag.org. Otherwise, we will see you again next Thursday for Something to Talk About Live. Have a great week, everybody.